Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'll be covering a kind of interesting video in terms of addressing maybe the start of the season without Lamptey and Shaw as well. Just to kind of touch on Lamptey, the Brighton manager mentioned that he would not be able to kind of start the season fit if he was to kind of complete his recovery, and we understand that it is a very long and kind of arduous process in terms of recovering from uh, the kind of ACL injury that Lamptey had, and for that reason, it makes a lot of sense to start the season with another 4.5 player. With Shaw, I think it's a little bit more unknown. We know that he has a rib injury, but from my reading on rib injuries, it seems that with a few weeks of rest, you actually can recuperate rather well. And with the increased news that Telles has been out injured, I think Solskjaer is the type of manager who would be very hesitant to actually start the season without Shaw. We saw, for example, Rashford playing through a shoulder injury for many portions of the previous year, and I expect Shaw to actually start the season. So that's kind of my preface in terms of that. But I will be looking at defenders overall, I think, this season, uh, particularly 4.5 replacements for Lamptey, but then also if you're a little bit scared of starting the season with Shaw, other kind of alternatives as well in terms of how you structure your team. So let's start with the 4.5 defenders, anyways. At 4.5, I think Ayling is one of the defenders that most people would look to, right, to replace Lamptey, because a lot of people are looking for this kind of Lamptey and Fofana pairing, and I'll discuss Fofana in a second. But, Ayling has not necessarily the nicest fixtures, but at least he does have the potential of actually being in a much more aggressive position as a fullback, right, at a 4.5 price, and someone who I think underperformed quite a bit last season, in my opinion. He had 0 goals and 0 assists. A lot of that was due to the fact that he had to kind of slot in at centre back and cover at times for the Leeds team. But I imagine that he will have a much more prominent attacking role this season and perhaps actually get to the totals that he had in the championship. Because, for example, if you make a comparison with his performances compared to Dallas, for example, in championship, they were very similar. And Dallas had a fantastic season last year, whereas Ayling had a huge drop off in terms of production. I actually think that Ayling will step up this year and probably match that. One of the risks, of course, is going to be the opening fixture. So if you kind of see Ayling as a potential stopgap for Lamptey, you might want to look for someone with potentially better fixtures from game week 1 and game week 2 or even game week 3. The reason why I've actually listed Chambers, despite the fact that he's kind of here listed as a rotation risk, is simply the fact that Chambers has found, I think, a very productive role in Arsenal where if they don't have any transfers and Bellerin's position is still under threat, then I think Chambers could actually start the season as their starting right back. It was something that we saw, Chambers coming in for the team at the back half of Arsenal's year. And Arsenal got a lot of clean sheets near the end of the season as they kind of surged a little bit higher up the mid-table. And a lot of this was also due to the fact that Chambers had came into the team, and what he provides, I think, is very good crossing. He's not the fastest player in the world, and I think that's his clear weakness as a player, playing at a fullback for an elite team. But right now, I think Arteta seems to have given faith to him. He started the preseason off with 2 starts already, and it's an interesting thing I think with Arsenal going forwards with Chambers because it means that, let's say if Bellerin leaves and they don't have a temporary replacement, they could likely start the season with Chambers as a starter and Cedric being a kind of bench option. And I kind of like the fact that he gets to play that Brentford fixture. And remember, Arsenal as well, despite Chelsea kind of listed as a red fixture, had a good run versus Chelsea last season, but still a little bit of a tough kind of fixture list with Chelsea and Man City. But going forwards, from game week 3, we know that Arsenal have very good kind of fixtures. So it might make sense to actually open the season with him and actually see how he looks as a player. And if you actually think he's doing well, then keep him as opposed to kind of swapping back to Lamptey. With Fofana, I think a lot of people saw him as kind of like an alternative, someone who would sit alongside Lamptey in your team. And I think Fofana, simply put, doesn't have enough offensive potential to really warrant a place in your side to replace Lamptey directly. I think you want to have a look at a fullback option potentially who actually can produce on the offensive end. Because for me, Fofana, I wouldn't say he's an injury-prone player at all, but simply put, I think he doesn't produce enough on the offensive end, and I think Leicester also really struggled with James Justin kind of missing out last season. Once James Justin got injured, you can actually see the clean sheet kind of percentage of Leicester dropping. And for me, I think that's the reason to say that Fofana is likely going to be a miss for me. I wouldn't touch Fofana, and I think he's a bit of a trap at that kind of high percentage ownership. I don't expect Leicester to necessarily defend better than last year because I actually think their best defender, James Justin, is still injured, and there's no reason to really touch any defender from Leicester until James Justin returns. In terms of Veltman, he is going to be that kind of simple, direct replacement for Lamptey. One of the kind of drawbacks, I'd say, from going Veltman right now is, simply put, I think he might be going into Ben White's position at right centre back, and that could take away from his offensive appeal. And for that reason, it might mean that you might not want to pick a kind of double Brighton defense. If you do, I would actually rather you price up and look at someone like Dunk, we'll discuss in a second. But I think, Veltman could be a good stopgap, at least at the start of the season, given the nice, healthy fixtures for Brighton, if you want to kind of immediately slot Lamptey back in as soon as he's fit. If we actually decide to upgrade, or let's say not start the season with Shaw and want to price down our defense a little bit, right? Because a lot of people have gone for these kind of 5.5 templates. Maybe you can start the season, why not with someone who's at a 5.0 level, right? Someone like Coufal or Dunk. Coufal for me was, I think, a fantastic player last year. Someone who had the second most amount of kind of best stats in terms of chances created on an underlying basis, right? And even with West Ham not keeping many clean sheets last season, we saw that Coufal had fantastic offensive dividends, and we saw that kind of performance carried on over in the Euros as well, which means that, I think, in my opinion, he is that type of player who can have, once again, a fantastic year. His ownership is high, and fairly so. I think Coufal is a fantastic option, and what he represents as well is the ability to kind of drop down from, let's say, someone like Cresswell, and still have a West Ham defender who produces a lot on his own end and gives you kind of budget flexibility in other areas of the pitch. So I think he kind of goes hand in hand with Cresswell. You either pick one or the other, and it probably makes more sense to actually upgrade your team elsewhere, given that you have such a similar replacement at a 0.5 kind of discount, right? With Dunk, I think this is someone where, once again, the trap is going to be doubling up in the Brighton defense. But Dunk had a fantastic season last year, just in terms of the offensive end, right? Something that we don't say very often for centre backs not named Virgil van Dijk. Dunk had 5 aerial goals last season, which shows that kind of contribution, I think, can be expected from him. He was a huge aerial threat, and I think Brighton's fixture list is healthy. He also doesn't have super high ownership, and simply put, I think he's nailed on and is someone who's kind of injury free. So Dunk makes a lot of sense for me if you aren't, fearful of doubling up on Brighton. With Cresswell, as I've discussed, he's someone who, the reason why he's priced a little bit higher than Coufal is, simply put, because he gets to go on these set pieces for West Ham, and he benefits a lot from that in terms of getting those additional points over the course of the season. For you, I'd probably question whether he can kind of reproduce that kind of performance from set pieces last year, because I think in open play, Coufal is a better player. And of course, it might be the case that West Ham are a little bit more reliant this season on their attacking players, given the fact that they play a very, I would say, offensive structure. But I think they've tried to dial that back, tactically, with making sure that they have like a holding pivot as well. And at times it might mean that, the fullbacks going forward have to kind of slow it down a bit in terms of having such a offensive role in the team, because they can be hit on the counter quite easily. But regardless, let's look at Digne as well. Digne is that kind of alternative that I think a lot of people are looking at, given the fact that Everton's fixtures are fantastic. On top of that, I think Digne clearly benefits from the Sigurdsson kind of debacle. I hope, obviously, the investigation is cleared, but or that he's found guilty if he is. But simply put, Digne is someone who benefits a lot from Sigurdsson being out. He takes more set pieces. He benefits a lot from an FPL point of view, from being able to kind of create more chances, especially for someone like Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And therefore, I think Digne makes a lot of sense this season, right? Especially having a more defensively sound manager with Benitez coming in. Someone who's actually much better, I think, at getting performances out of the league than someone like Ancelotti, who's much better at specific fixtures and ties and doing well in the Champions League. With Wan-Bissaka, I mean, this is a complete lateral kind of side trade from Shaw, right? If you don't think that Shaw will start the season, Wan-Bissaka is someone who provides a lot less, I think, in terms of underlying stats, but someone who actually outscored Shaw, ironically, last season. But I think that also comes down to the fact that Shaw was rotated at times, injured at times as well. So I think, if Shaw is fit, clearly go for Shaw. But Wan-Bissaka is that kind of alternative option if it seems like Shaw doesn't get to start the season fit. With Robertson, I think the reason why I've gone immediately there instead of touching on Man City players is because I think Man City's opening fixture list is rather poor. And on top of that, I think that there is still the threat of rotation in amongst all positions, really, with the exception to potentially left back if Zinchenko is fit. For me, I think with Man City, it's clear that Cancelo can start the season as well, because Walker played a very pivotal role in the Euros, and therefore Cancelo could start the season. but then could later be a rotation risk when Walker slots back into the team. And the same can be said with Stones, because I think Pep is someone who, year on year doesn't have to necessarily count on specific players, with the exception to someone like Kevin De Bruyne, right? He's happy to rotate players if they're not playing well, and it could be the case that Laporte could depose him this year, which is something that Stones did in the year prior, right? I think Pep is someone who's open to that, or at least open to rotating players, and I think even though Stones looks like one of the best FPL options potentially for Man City, I would still probably stay off from him now. Just due to the fixtures, and the same goes for Diaz for that reason, at a 6.0 price. I think the reason why Robertson makes sense is because I don't think the Liverpool triple up is absurd. I think, when you compare him across the pitch and across the field, there are not many great, I would say, 7.0 forwards, and a lot of people would be looking at probably Tony at 6.5, so that is a bit of a kind of a price discount. And of course, there are some mids as well at 6.5 and 6.0. But I think what Robertson brings is like a guarantee, someone who probably will play the bulk of the season. And if you expect Liverpool to trend up in terms of clean sheets due to kind of Van Dijk coming back, and then also Konate and Gomez fighting for that second centre back spot, you're expecting much more clean sheets this season, right? And also, what that structure provides when Fabinho comes back in, when Henderson comes back in, provided they get a third centre mid, is much more stability in terms of how much of the possession that they get to create, how many more chances are created as well from the team. Robertson had to play a much more defensive role last year due to the shortcomings of the defense, and I think for that reason you can expect him to have a much better performance, And the only risk really is tripling up now in Liverpool, when potentially you might want to save up that triple up for going for someone like Mane if they're really firing, or simply if you just are someone who believes in kind of diversity, right? And for that reason, I think these are the picks that I would say that you'd like to replace Lamptey or Shaw with. Of course, that kind of requires a little bit of budgeting up, budgeting down, but you have to kind of look at it reasonably with the rest of the options. I think they're great premiums and also budget options, in terms of the midfield and forward positions. So this really could be the year where you go for Robertson. But if you don't have like the full faith in, let's say, Liverpool, then it makes a lot of sense for me to actually look at these 5.0 options and potentially look at, replacing Lamptey right now with a fullback from another team, and then kind of going back to him if you actually don't think they're performing so well. I would probably avoid Fofana from all the people on this list, probably Cresswell as well, and Wan-Bissaka, because I think Shaw will be fit. But this is kind of my take on, starting the season without Lamptey and Shaw. If you guys have any questions in the comments, please feel free to leave them below. But otherwise, have a wonderful day.